ladies. Today, I'm going to tell you that carbs are not the devil. We're going to talk about whole grains today. And I'll just tell you from a personal standpoint, I avoided carbs and grains for years. In my early 40s, I discovered that I had celiac disease as well as my firstborn son. My son actually has something called cross-contamination, meaning that he cannot tolerate any cereal grains. In solidarity with my eldest son, I went on the paleo food plan for probably about 7 years. What I found when I was on paleo is that my moods were not good. Particularly in the morning, I was very grumpy. And I didn't really recognize that I was hangry until I started incorporating whole grains into my diet. And whole grains are something that I've eaten before in my 20s and in my teens, and now have come back to again in midlife. And I actually feel pretty passionate about whole grains and why they are so good for us in midlife. And we're going to talk about all the wonderful reasons and what's important when we're preparing grains. So there's a lot of information out there about ancestral diets and about grains and agriculture and what is the proper kind of diet for human consumption. Follows ancestral cues from hunter-gatherers. I spent a lot of time also on Weston Price diet, which is another ancestral diet that kind of honors the agricultural phase of human development. So if we look back in time, we will find that there are archaeological findings that support evidence that humans have relied on grains as a staple food for at least 100,000 years. Grains are actually the edible seeds of plants. A grain is a whole grain if it contains 3 key parts of the grain: the oat, the bran, and the endosperm. Cereal grains come from grasses, such as wheat, oats, rye, corn, barley, sorghum, and millet. There's another class of foods that people refer to as grains, but they're really pseudo-cereals. Those are quinoa, buckwheat, and amaranth. Why do we want to eat grains, especially in our midlife? One of the most important things about grains is the soluble fiber that they contain. Soluble fiber is really important to us in middle age because it keeps us regular and it actually helps the body to shed visceral fat. Whole grains actually help us to mitigate insulin resistance in middle age because they keep our blood sugar even. Whole grains carry out metabolic waste from our liver, including excess estrogen. The complex carbohydrates provided by grains help us in our brain function, in our mood, and in our energy levels. Here's some more reasons why whole grains are great. They are whole and unprocessed. They're high in minerals and nutrients that are important for our brain, gut, and heart health. As I mentioned, they're high in fiber and they help to keep our digestive tract clean. They have a beneficial effect on LDL cholesterol. The sugar that's in whole grains is absorbed slowly and it provides sustained energy for us all day. And it does not spike our insulin levels like other forms of sugar do. What's great about whole grains is that they're filling and satisfying. When I eat whole grains, I don't find myself needing to snack. I don't find myself having cravings. Whole grains are delicious. Whole grains also have a wealth of antioxidants and are anti-inflammatory. They have cancer-fighting benefits. At 49 years old, I consume about 2 cups of whole grains each day. My favorite is black wild rice. Here are some other whole grains that you might consider adding to your plate. Black wild rice, forbidden rice. Forbidden rice is really cool. Forbidden rice is called forbidden rice because it was grown specifically for the Emperor of China, and the common people were not allowed to eat it. It's black and it's absolutely delicious. It's a short grain rice. There's basmati and jasmine rice, which are very aromatic. Steel cut oats, millet. Millet is actually a West African grain. I grew up eating millet. I hated millet growing up. My mother used to make millet, dates, and apple juice for breakfast, cooked. It's funny how sometimes we find ourselves returning to the things that we didn't like when we were children. Quinoa. I have to say quinoa is not my favorite, but people love quinoa. It's high in protein. And teff is another whole grain, and sorghum. I can actually eat barley even though I have gluten sensitivity. Here's some grains that you might consider avoiding. Wheat berries, spelt, kamut, farro, and bulgur. If you have gluten intolerance, consider avoiding these grains. Wheat berries, spelt, kamut, farro, bulgur, rye, barley, and triticale. These grains are either members of the wheat family or high in gluten. So next we're going to talk about how to prepare grains. So first of all, it's important to either purchase grains that are sprouted or soak them yourself. The reason why is because there is actually a coating on the outside of grains. That's a natural part of the grain's immune system. And the coating is there to prevent it from sprouting unintentionally. So in order to inhibit this particular enzyme, which is an anti-nutrient, it's important for you to soak the grains overnight. For thousands of years, humans harvested grains. They tied them in sheaves and they were exposed to the weather outside. Inevitably, at least some of the grains would begin to sprout. Soaking grains actually mimics this ancestral process. By soaking the grains, we deactivate a protective coating that preserves the seed and keeps it dormant. Soaked or sprouted grains are far higher in nutrients that are bioavailable and are much easier to digest. So it's worth the 5 minutes it takes to soak the grains overnight. So I put my grains in a bowl in some clean water and I put a little splash of apple cider vinegar in and I leave it overnight. The next morning, I rinse the grains before I cook them. I know that by doing this, I am making the grains more bioavailable. I'm reducing anything that is difficult for me to digest. As I mentioned, cooking your grains ahead is a great time-saving hack. I like to cook my grains all in one day, and then I put them into glass or metal containers and store them in the refrigerator for the week.